I'm Yann Martel, the author of Life of Pi, The High Mountains of Portugal, and Self, and I'm delighted to be a judge for the next big story from the Novelry. How important is the main character or person in a novel? Well, stories are always ultimately about people, even stories that may be really invested in a landscape or historical event or something. Ultimately, it comes down to people. The main character is called that for a reason. Everything is seen through the eyes of that character or has impact on that character. Usually a story does start with something happening to someone. In my fiction, usually my character is relatively anonymous and sympathetic, so you can sort of slip in beside them. Sort of like someone's driving a car and you slip in beside them and you trust them to drive you the way and you look out and see what they see. So for example, in Life of Pi, Pi is a fairly nice character that you're presumably happy to spend time with. But that's not the only kind of main character you can have that you can root for. You can have deliciously evil characters and you enjoy their evil. Think all the number of Roald Dahl stories with mean parents or horrible children, and you sort of enjoy, because they're not truly horrible. There's something amusing or alluring about them that draws you along. So it's not about necessarily main characters being likable, but you somehow have to be invested in them. There has to be something about them for which you want to see an outcome. Not necessarily a happy ending. For example, how many crime stories are set up where you know who's done the murder and you're kind of curious to how they will be found out. So you love hating them. You just have to make the character alluring in some way, whether they're good or bad. Just something about them where you're curious about the outcome, how they will end up. I don't normally, when I'm thinking of a story, think of character first. It's more of an event, a circumstance, and out of that a character will emerge. These other peripheral thematic things that eventually brought me to the character. Pi Patel in Life of Pi emerged as a character in a fairly secondary way, in the sense that I was more interested in this idea of someone in a shipwreck with an animal. I was more interested in the metaphor of the lifeboat being a metaphor in the human condition. We are a mixture of the divine and the animal. The crossing of the Pacific is like the crossing of a human life. The reaching of the coast of Mexico is sort of like the reaching of salvation. I was more interested in those, and in that, Pi's specific character was kind of secondary. So in fact, I would say Life of Pi is not a character-driven story. It's more of a fable, it's more of an allegory, it's more driven by the thematic interests of it. But for other people, it'll be very different, of course. Character will be the central thing, and everything will follow from that. Another novel I wrote called Self, where the main character, while backpacking in Portugal, switches from being boy to a woman at 18. That one was more character driven because it was essentially a story of a single person and their changing identity. So that one was more character driven, and that was done earlier. And that, once again, though, it emerges from the ideas you're trying to discuss. Because after all, also in life, character is fluid. I mean, some people we think of as being very fixed, but most of us are fairly fluid. Depending on our circumstances, our age, we will change, evolve. So characters in a novel do the same thing. As I said, for me, it kind of depends on the story, what the character will be. By the third page, you certainly want to know what the story is about and who it will revolve around, which is not to say that all the characters have to be introduced. In fact, if you're writing an epic about 3 generations of Irish family, you're obviously not going to meet all the characters because some maybe aren't even born. But certainly the catalyst, one of the main catalysts, should be met fairly early on.